welcome to episode 219 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. I'm really glad to have you with us. I hope things are going well for you. Hope that you are underway with your studies if you're taking the test in 2019. If you're waiting for results from the July 2018 exams, we know how painful and difficult that can be to sit and wait and wait and wait. In fact, we waited till the very last minute to put out this episode because we thought there was still a possibility that New York results might come out. But as I'm recording today on Monday, we still haven't seen them. So perhaps by Wednesday when this comes out, they'll be out. In any event, we'll keep our eyes open and we'll let you know as soon as we get those results. We did get Connecticut bar results out last week. It was another jurisdiction with disappointing results, a 55% pass rate, the lowest in quite some time, continuing the trend across the country of the lowest pass rates, the lowest scores that we've seen in years and years in the multi-state going back to 1984. So these are hard times in the bar exam, and I know that that doesn't make anybody that's waiting for results feel comfortable, but that's where we are. Now, we do know that there are people who are passing the exam, and we'll be sharing in upcoming episodes some interviews that we've done that we're recording now with successful bar takers. I think you're going to find them really interesting. But in today's episode, I thought I'd focus on something a bit different. I wanted to talk about a strategy that I've referenced a few times in passing, and that is this idea that it may be better for you if you're sitting in a big jurisdiction with a tough pass score like Florida or California, Texas, Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and there are others. But if you're in one of those states, you might consider transferring and sitting for the uniform bar exam instead. And in today's episode, I'm going to share with you a video I've just recorded on that topic and offer some suggestions about the strategy itself, why we think it's a good strategy, how well it's worked, and then some things you need to consider if you're going to take up this idea of switching to the UBE. So if you're thinking about what exam to take, maybe you got your results back in Florida and they weren't successful, or maybe you're not expecting successful results in some other jurisdictions, this is something for you to be thinking about. And if you're waiting for your results, it's something I think for you to consider in anticipation of those results, particularly if you're in a jurisdiction like California. It's got a tough pass rate and a very late release date. So that's going to be our message today, and we'll jump into that in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to invite all of you to attend a very special live training session this Thursday, October 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's 4 o'clock Pacific time. We're going to be talking about the importance of doing something different, making the next bar exam your last bar exam. I'm going to be sharing with you 4 steps that successful bar takers follow in order to be able to pass the exam. And we'll share case studies with you. We'll share the specific steps that we think you need to employ in order to have success as you study for the bar exam. This training is live and it's completely free, but you do need to register in advance. You can do that here on the webpage that you're watching this podcast, or on our show notes, or you can do it by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. And I hope you'll join us. It's easy to jump on and free to join the call, and we'd love to have you with us. There's also an on-demand version of the same material. You'll see that option when you go to register. If you prefer to schedule your own time to watch, it's not live, but obviously same material. You're welcome to use the on-demand version. So, hope we'll see you Thursday live, 7 p.m. Eastern. That's Thursday the 11th. Now, I mentioned that you could find that link here in the show notes, and then I realized, of course, I hadn't told you that you could watch this podcast on video, or you can listen to it on audio. If you'd like to watch the video version, go to celebrationbarreview.com/219. That's the episode number. If you'd like to listen to the podcast, well, maybe you're already doing that, but if you're watching and you'd rather listen, you can go to Apple iTunes or iHeartRadio or Spotify or any place the podcasts are syndicated, and you'll find it. And we do have all of our old episodes going all the way back to episode number 1 on our website. Go to celebrationbarreview.com, click on the button for podcasts, and all of the show notes and episodes are there for you. Check it out. There's a lot of great material. So, lots of ways that you can get your podcasts from us and your information. And if this is your first time on the podcast with us, we're glad you're here. We appreciate it. We hope you'll find it useful. We come to you every week talking about all things bar exam related. Well, I'm excited to jump into this content we've got to share with you today about why you should switch to the UBE. I think you're going to find it provocative and interesting and a really great strategy, so I want to share that with you now. As the bar exam gets tougher and tougher and pass rates go lower and lower, I think it's becoming more important to people to start thinking about different strategies, different approaches to how they want to get into the exam and become a member of the bar, any bar, so that they can begin to start the next phase of their life to begin to actually practice law. Over the past few years, we've been working with a strategy that's had increasing success. In fact, it's had almost near universal success. And I'm really excited about it. And I wanted to just lay it out a little more formally because I keep getting asked about our feelings and suggestions about this. And essentially, the strategy is this. If you're sitting currently in a jurisdiction that is not part of the uniform bar exam, and for many people this would include big states like Florida, California, Texas, Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, if you're in one of those states, and many others I've not mentioned, and you are unable to pass the bar in that state, we're going to suggest that you take a very serious look at switching to the uniform bar exam and taking the exam in a different jurisdiction with a different passing format, a different score, and then applying into other UBE states. And eventually, if you decide you want to come back to your original home state, that's certainly a possibility, and you could sit for that exam again. But the idea here is to simply get you over the hurdle, to get you barred somewhere, because quite frankly, there's a huge disparity right now in the passing scores between the UBE jurisdictions, at least some of them, and some of these standalone states. So in this video, what I want to do is walk through three guidelines that we have for you about how to do that process, to explain a little bit about why we're implementing or suggesting this strategy, and to give you some case studies of where it's working for other people or where it has worked for other people. So let me begin, I guess, with explaining why would you think about this strategy in the first place. And the answer is really pretty obvious. If you've been taking the bar exam in a jurisdiction that is not the uniform bar exam, the UBE, and you've been unsuccessful, it may be time to consider switching jurisdictions. Now, in the old days, meaning like a couple of years ago, that wasn't really much of an option. You had to start all over again, and so you're just changing one state for another, and maybe you could do it, and maybe you couldn't, and maybe it made sense, but for a lot of people, why go somewhere else where you don't live? May or may not do you any good. But over the past few years, the uniform bar exam has expanded dramatically, and its reach has expanded, and the ability to take a law license from one state to another is beginning to expand. It becomes considerably less important, not across the board, but generally speaking, it is less important to be barred in the state in which you are currently residing. We are constantly seeing attorneys who have bar licenses in other states who are able to do the kind of legal work they want in a different state. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not advocating the unauthorized practice of law, far from it. If you plan to practice in a Florida state court, for example, you will have to be a member of the Florida bar. But there are a lot of Florida jobs available to barred attorneys in other states, and I think it's important to recognize this as a beginning point of your strategy. Now, one way that I think is important, and one of the reasons to think about this strategy, is simply to recognize how the exams are scored and the difference in the passing rates or the threshold number. We call this in bar review the cut score. And essentially the cut score is where do you pass and where do you fail. Well, if we're taking Florida as an example, Florida requires a scaled score of 136 out of a 200-point scale, and it has to be an accumulation or an average of your multi-state scaled score on 200 points and a written score on a 200 point score. Scale score. There you go. All right. So when we take 136 for multi-state and 136 for Florida to get you the required 136, that's 272 scaled points on a 400-point scale. Now, it's important to have that 272 number in mind because that's our comparison for purposes of the UBE. California is an even more stark example. In California, you need a 1440, but actually that translates out using our same 400-point scale to a 288. 144 on the written portion, 144 on the multi-state. And you might be going, whoa, 144 multi-state. Yeah, that's right. It's a huge number. So when you take the 288 in California and you compare it to a 272 in Florida, Florida looks pretty good, doesn't it? But really, it gets even better because in the UBE, there are jurisdictions that will accept you with a score of 260. 260. Now, if you're sitting in Texas or Georgia, two other states that we prepare students for, that cut score is 270. So you can see that there's a big disparity in these different states. And unless you are a California student who is allowed only to sit for the California exam because of where you went to law school, it is worthwhile to consider moving out of one of these other jurisdictions, or to Texas, Georgia, California. The same would be true for Pennsylvania, Ohio, and other states, and considering switching over to the UBE. That's the basis of the strategy. Once you've switched over to the new jurisdiction and you've taken past that jurisdiction, you are then barred. You're licensed somewhere else. Now, the question is, what do you do with your bar license in another state or from another state? And the answer is you might choose to move there, but maybe you keep your bar license and you start doing work in your home state, or maybe you just take that confidence boost and you come back to your home state and you sit for the exam. There's also a weird little feature, particularly in Florida right now, that says that if you got better than a 136 on your scaled MBE in another state, you can import that MBE score into Florida and only sit for the Florida day of the exam. And of course, there are different rules in states like California and Georgia for the attorney's exam after you've been in active practice for a period of time, and it varies depending on the jurisdiction. But the point is that there are options open to you after you've passed the bar and are a member of another state's bar. So that's the reason for the strategy. We're seeing people who simply can't get to the numbers in their state, but they can get over the 260 threshold. So if you've taken the exam and your score would translate to somewhere between, say, 250 or above, but not high enough for your state's jurisdiction, then I would seriously consider this strategy as being one to think about. Now, does the strategy work? Well, yeah, it does. And we've put up interviews on our webpage at our case studies page with a number of people who've employed this strategy. I want to just point out a couple of them to you, and we'll link in the notes here as well. But Amanda Miljanovic is one person that had taken the exam 8 or 9 times and then switched out, went to the UBE and passed, and is doing well. Naisha Serrano is another individual, took the Florida bar, couldn't get through it, switched up to the UBE in the District of Columbia, and she passed. Jackie Schobel had taken the exam in a couple of different states, came back and redid the UBE and passed. There are lots and lots of stories that we could share with you, and we'll continue to share with you of people employing this strategy. But I will say that in the past couple of years, as I've become actively engaged in promoting this, I have seen it work over and over again for students. It's really something worth considering. And if you've just reached that point of breaking where you say, you know, it's just not getting any better for me, I just can't seem to get over the threshold in my home state, I really encourage you to consider this. I think it's a great idea. Well, if you've decided to take this strategy under advisement, there are 3 steps that I think you want to follow, and I want to go through those now for the remainder of our time together. The first step is you want to choose your jurisdiction wisely. Choose wisely. As I said, there are 33 states that offer the uniform bar exam, and they range all over the country from literally Alaska up to New York. Now, there are several new additions to the UBE. I'm going to get to those in a moment, but let me just talk about a couple of big jurisdictions that already employ the uniform bar exam, and probably the biggest among those is New York. If you are planning to take the New York bar exam, if you're a foreign trained attorney, if you've been taking the exam in California as a foreign trained attorney, or in Texas or in Georgia, don't. Go to New York and take the UBE instead. It's a much easier test and a much more passable test. The passing scaled score in New York for the UBE is 266. A couple of other large jurisdictions worth considering are Illinois. It's a new jurisdiction coming on board, but New Jersey is another UBE jurisdiction, as well as Colorado. I'm trying to think of big jurisdictions. Those are some of the larger ones. Tends to be a lot of small states. And that's one of the things to keep in mind. But New York, New Jersey, D.C. are all part of the UBE. Massachusetts just came online to the UBE this year, so that's another big jurisdiction. Now, in addition to those states that I've just mentioned, as I said, Illinois is coming online to the UBE. Maryland is adding the test in 2019. Tennessee is coming online. North Carolina and Rhode Island. So there are lots and lots of states out there. Now, does it matter which state you go to sit for the exam? And the honest answer is no, it really doesn't matter. Take the test where it's convenient for you geographically. If you don't live in any UBE state, pick the jurisdiction you'd like to go to. Does that mean that you should definitely go up to New York? Well, if you like going to Albany in February, knock yourself out, okay? But if it were up to me, I'd go to a warm weather place, take the same exam, and have an easier time of it in terms of travel and logistics. There are lots of locations that are small jurisdictions, places like New Mexico, South Carolina, even Wyoming, God forbid. There are many places you could go where you could have a quiet, small, much more intimate experience than you would be having in a big state like Illinois or New York or New Jersey. A lot of people like to go to the DC exam. The DC exam, I will just tell you, is a strange thing. It is run in its own very idiosyncratic way, but it's a small test, and there's a certain comfort about that, I think, for people. But it's a little quirky. I think that's the best thing I can tell you. So in any event, part of what you want to think about is how difficult will the process be of getting through character and fitness in that state, because you are applying for that state's exam, even though that may not be the state you care about at all. So it's one of the things you want to consider when it gets to choosing your jurisdiction. And I'll talk about that more in a moment in our second point. But obviously, one of the things you want to consider is what's the cut score, the passing score in this UBE jurisdiction. I think that it's obviously useful to try and sit in a jurisdiction where you would hope that you would pass based on their cut score. You would be admitted because you've done the character and fitness. That's the easiest route to bar licensure. So one of the things you want to do is to look at the charts that tell you what the passing scores are. Now, let me identify the 5 jurisdictions currently with the lowest required cut score. That's a 260, 260. And those 5 states are Alabama, Minnesota, Missouri, New Mexico, and North Dakota. Kind of an interesting eclectic mix, but those are the 5. Does that mean you should only sit in those 5 states? No, not at all. But if you're close to Missouri, if you're in Texas, for example, it might not be a bad idea to take the Missouri test. If you're up in the middle of the country, maybe you want to not take the Illinois exam. It's a little too big for you. Minnesota would be a place to go. If you're in the Southeast, Alabama, nice small location. And New Mexico has always been one of my favorites. It's a small test and a very friendly bar examiner group of people. North Dakota, I don't know about North Dakota. I've heard weird things about North Dakota, so I can't really tell you. They're a little idiosyncratic as well. They're also a bit quirky. So there are some things to keep in mind. But basically, those are the 5 states that you want to start your initial focus on. When you move to the next scoring threshold, which is 266, now you have a broad range of states that are available. This includes Connecticut, DC, Iowa, Kansas, Montana, New Jersey, New York, big ones, South Carolina, and then the Virgin Islands. I mean, so if you want to go down to the Virgin Islands in February, there you go. Okay. So you have lots of choices, and the scores and the totals go up. As I said, it goes to a high of 280 points. That's in Alaska. So if you really wanted to take the bar exam in Alaska and score a 280, okay, go for it. But the point is, you've got different scores, different jurisdictions. So think about where you'd like to sit, what would make sense for you. Maybe you've got family or friends in a particular jurisdiction. So you want to check those things out. You can sit for the exam in any of the 33 states and territories, and that score is transferable to any of the other UBE jurisdictions. So it's a big advantage for you. You could sit for the exam in Alabama. If you get a 266, you could waive in, pay your fees into New York, New Jersey, Illinois, a lot of states. So that's step 1. Choose wisely. So I feel very Yoda-like. Choose wisely. Or is that, wax on, wax off? Okay. Second thing that you want to do after you've chosen your bar exam jurisdiction is you want to move quickly. Do not wait. Do not spend a long time reflecting or thinking or trying to figure out what you're going to do. Is that every state has their own filing deadlines, and they have their own requirements when it comes to character and fitness. If you're going to refile, if you've just gotten your results out of, say, the July exam, you need to move quickly to sit for the February test. In some cases, you may not be able to get into the jurisdictions you want because their filing deadlines have passed. So this is not something for you to procrastinate about. If this theory intrigues you, get on it now. Start making your calls, get online, find out what has to be done, find out what the fees are, and move very quickly. It's my suggestion that you contact several jurisdictions, that you don't put all your eggs in a single jurisdiction. Things change, rules change, states change their circumstances and what they require and when they require it, and it's good to have some backup. So as you start this process of evaluating what you're going to do, I would pick 2 or 3 states that you think might be possibilities and dive deep onto those. I wouldn't try to do a 33-state search. I don't think it's necessary, but I would have more than one states that you've got a backup. Now, does that mean that you abandon your attempt in your home state? Well, yeah, ultimately, that's what it means, at least for the time being. Some states will let your application remain in process without actively taking the exam for a year or 2. Others will pull you out of their process pretty quickly. So you want to know those rules as well and find out what's involved. If you've taken, for example, the Florida exam and passed part of it, Part A or Part B, but not the other, well, you may not want to take this strategy in place right now. It might be better for you to keep working on that remaining section and pass that. But you want to be looking at these rules, and you want to see, can I take my scores from my home state, any part of them, and transfer them into your jurisdiction? In general, in the UBE, the answer is going to be no. But again, every state is a little different, and you want to follow those rules and find out. The other reason that I want you to move quickly is that I think it makes a difference to type your answers rather than to handwrite. You'll need to file early in almost every jurisdiction, or earlier if you want to word process your exams rather than handwrite them. So time is of the essence all the way around. Now, if you are just thinking to yourself, oh my God, another character and fitness check, all of that, I realize that that's a big hurdle. However, if you've got copies of your current character and fitness check, and I'm sure you do, really it's mostly a matter of copying and sending that same material. So it's not as burdensome as you might expect. Very few states are as tough as Florida, for example, on character and fitness. So I think you'd find the process easier in most jurisdictions than what you might be going through in a state like Florida or California or Texas. So some things to just keep in mind. So step 1 was choose wisely. Step 2, move quickly. Do not wait, or you'll be sitting out an exam. And time is really important here, because the length of time in which these exam results can be transferred has a freshness date to it. So you want to move relatively quickly. And then the third suggestion I would make for you is to start fresh. The exam for the uniform bar is not state specific. There is no state law tested. This has been a real source of confusion, particularly to New York bar takers, who are convinced that because it's in New York, it must be New York law. It is not. The same test is given in Alabama that's given in New York. Same order, same essays, same performance tests. But having said that, it is a completely different exam than what you've done before. Many of you have taken an exam, but never a performance test. Many of you have taken state-specific essays, but nothing that's generic. A few of you have been in states that had the multi-state essay exam. That is part of what is now the UBE. It's the essay part. And so you're more familiar with the 30-minute generic kind of question. But it is different than a 1-hour essay or a 45-minute essay. And you're going to be starting fresh. You need a fresh approach to your study, a fresh approach to your learning. There's a subgroup of people, however, for whom this is even more important. Let's say that you've been taking the bar exam in North Carolina and you failed it a couple times. And now, coming up, it's suddenly a UBE jurisdiction. Well, great. You get to stay in the same state, take the test again, but now it's moved to you. It's actually taken this strategy in effect. So what do you do with all your North Carolina bar study books? The answer is you throw them away, you burn them, you recycle them. They are of no value to you whatsoever. The test is not state specific. I'll keep saying it, but it's really hard to get through to people. The test will have no state law in it, even if it was previously a state specific exam. So in Maryland, in Illinois, in North Carolina, in Tennessee, in Rhode Island, all of those jurisdictions, you are moving to a completely different test. It's as though you moved across the country to take a brand new exam. Do not study for it the way you did before. Now, I've had some people ask me, well, how will they grade the essays? Won't it be the same graders? And the answer is probably yes, it'll be the same graders, but they will now have a new rubric called a grader point sheet. In our course, we provide you with the license questions, the essays, performance tests, and MBEs. And for the essays and performance tests, we also include the grader point sheets. This is the direction given to the graders as to how to evaluate the written work that comes to them. And even if the graders, let's say in your state, have been grading a certain way in the state exam, they are now going to be directed differently for the purposes of the essays and the performance tests on the UBE. And this is important to recognize. It means that your writing style might have to change. The format of your writing might have to change. We saw this in New York very clearly when we went from a very idiosyncratic writing style that was preferred by the New York examiners to a very generic writing style that's been quite successful since the test renamed as the UBE. So you want to be very careful about this and not continue to use your old materials. They are really almost worthless to you on the state part of the exam or day one of the test, the Tuesday day. So this is important that you recognize that difference, recognize your essays and your performance tests will be graded differently. For some of you, performance tests will be brand new and you're going to need preparation for that. It's a completely different part of the exam and it takes up a total of 3 hours of the test day. So it's a big part of the test worth extra points relative to the essays. So you want to make sure that you are prepared for that. The other thing I want to point out to you is that the percentiles in many states will change as well. Under the UBE, 50% of your grade comes from the multi-state and 50% comes from the written portion. And the written portion is made up of the essays, the 6 30-minute essays, and the 2 90-minute performance tests. So it's a different grading pattern and it's a different grading scale. So you want to be very careful to not overstudy one part or the other. You might have come from a state where the multi-state was worth less than the state portion. That's no longer the case. And it's a big difference in your study and strategy. So it's one of the reasons you want to be taking a course that prepares you for the UBE. Now, we've been very fortunate. We've been teaching UBE since it was first introduced back in 2011. So it's not new to us, even if it's new to you. And our course includes all of the licensed essays, all of the licensed MPTs, 2,100 multi-state license questions, and the right approach to writing essays and performance tests, taking the MBEs that works for people and helps them to be successful. But I think it's really important that you start fresh. Don't try to redo what you've done before. Don't take your Florida study and try and put it into Alabama. It won't work. Don't take your California studies and try and put them into Minnesota. It won't work. This is a different test, graded differently, scored differently, evaluated differently, and it's got to be prepared for differently. And I think that's an important piece to keep in mind. Well, that's the strategy in short. Find a UBE jurisdiction, settle in, put in your application, start preparing right away. You're going to need, in our experience, about 250 to 300 hours of study to get ready for the UBE. Take a qualified UBE course like ours. We're not the only ones out there, to be sure, but we've been teaching it longer than anybody, and we've got a terrific track record of success. And I think we've got an even better track record working with people who have taken the exams in other states and not been successful. And I think it's really important to recognize that there's an emotional component to this, and there's a sense of new hope and optimism that comes when you switch. We've had some great stories. One of the ones I love the most comes from Andrew DeMasters. He came to us having failed the New York bar in its old iteration. We switched him to the UBE. He passed, was able to wave his score in, then came back to New York under the UBE, passed again, and is now practicing. And it's a great story in our case studies videos. But Andrew's been a wonderful example of somebody who just got the momentum he needed by switching into the UBE, and it's supercharged his career and his licensure. He's licensed in a bunch of places now. And I think that that's the approach that you can take if you want it. And I really encourage you, if you've been discouraged about what's been happening for you in the bar exam, this is a really interesting approach that we're seeing wonderful success with, and I hope you'll consider it. If you'd like to know more about it, feel free to contact us. You can go to our website, or you can set up a consultation with me, and we'll put the link in the notes to this video as well. And we'd love to talk with you about it, because we do think it's a great way to be successful on the test. So good luck to you. I hope you find your wonderful state on the UBE, and that it turns out to be a winning strategy for you. episode for today. I hope you found this strategy interesting. Hope you consider it if you've been thinking that maybe you want to get out of a state like Florida or California. This is a great way to do it, and look forward to talking with you. Want to put a link on the show notes here. If you would like to talk with me about this strategy, there's a link that you can use to schedule a free conference with me, and I'd be glad to talk with you about it. Also want to let you know that we've got lots of case studies of successful people who've used this strategy, and we're going to put that link in the show notes as well. So check those two things out. And then, of course, I hope we'll see you this Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for our live free training, Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam your last bar exam. Make sure that you register in advance. You can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar, and then we'll see you live there. Lots of great information and a live Q&A when we're done, so I think you'll find that really helpful. Well, again, for those of you waiting for your bar results, New York, Texas, the next two states up, we expect, big states. Good luck to you. We hope the results are favorable, and we will be back to you as soon as we get that information. And next week, we've got a great interview coming up with a successful Florida bar taker, so I know you're going to want to stick around for that. Hope everybody has a great week. We'll see you along the extra mile next week and on the pass list. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.